Good morning. Welcome to Hordle and Tiptoe online chat again. Lovely to have you with us. We're recording this on a day when it's getting just a little bit brighter and lighter. The snowdrops are coming out. Daffodils are just beginning to open, and God's creation is waking up. We have that surety that creation never fails. God never fails us. This morning most of you will recognize our guests, Graham, the Reverend Graham Fairbairn. Graham and Liz joined us about 3 years ago at Hordle and Tiptoe. Graham, we thank him so much for his wonderful contributions all the way through, and particularly with the online services that he's brought to us. Some of you may know something of Graham's background before. He's spent a time working in ministry in Essex. Before that, he had 29 years with Tearfund in various positions that he was Deputy CEO latterly. I've asked Graham to come and talk to us about that, but not so much about his work, but the fact that Graham has, and he's quite happy to talk about this, what I'm reliably informed is termed as a learning disability or reading disability, which is dyslexia. Now, Graham, probably if you don't know Graham, you would never ever believe that when you hear him speak. But Graham, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I know you want to talk about God's goodness in your life and Liz's. Can you just tell us your story, please?
Tim, thanks very much for this opportunity. It's great to be able to join you. I suppose it's important to explain the accent first of all. Folk don't seem to always pick it up nowadays, but I was born in Scotland, in the beautiful town of Peebles, probably the most beautiful town in the whole country, in the opinion of those of us who come from Peebles. But it is a very elegant town on the banks of the Tweed. When I was 6 years old, my father took up a new appointment in an organisation in the north of Ireland. And we moved as a family to a small rural village there. And it was quite a change for me. I found school extremely difficult. Yeah. I have had difficulty with reading and spelling all my life. Anybody that gets an email from me will probably say, what's wrong with him? Well, it's just that I've pushed the wrong button on the computer to correct a spelling and I've put in the wrong word. That still happens. But when I was 6, I couldn't understand why the letters all jumbled up and the words were back to front. I couldn't understand, and certainly the teachers didn't understand either. I was looking recently at some family history and I came across my first school report, and it said very good in everything. I was a model child, obviously, but
of course,
in one column it just said lacks fluency in reading. So obviously, even to the educationalists, there was an early indication that there was something that wasn't working for me. As I said, school in Northern Ireland was very difficult, and I didn't enjoy it at all because nobody understood that there could be anything wrong. I remember one teacher saying to me, Fairbairn, how on earth can you be so stupid and so clever all in the same day? And I think those things stick with you. But I was confident enough that the clever bit was working. In that particular primary school, the headmaster was a great traditionalist, and he put all his energy and the energy of his staff into those who were likely to pass the 11 plus. I hadn't a hope, so we just sat back, the rest of us who weren't being pushed forward for the 11 plus. So I didn't make it to grammar school and didn't even have the opportunity. Eventually I managed to get to the local technical school and did a course for pre-apprenticeship, they called it. It was a vocational course, which was great. It was a big help. But I left school at 16 with no qualifications, none at all, just because of the transition in the educational system at that time in Northern Ireland. But when I was about 11, my father took me to see a friend of his who was a headmaster, a fairly progressive thinking headmaster, and he did some tests with me, and he talked me through, listened to my poor reading, got me to spell some things. And he said to my father and gave him an article on something that they called in those days word blindness.
Yeah.
Dyslexia wasn't talked about.
No.
For many years in education, it wasn't accepted as a condition. So he was thinking about this sort of stuff, and he said, have a look at this. And as my dad read through that particular article, it came clear that the symptoms of how I operated were there in this so-called word blindness. But that's 65, 70 years ago, almost 60 years ago. And there was nothing happening in the educational scene on that. When I left school, my father's boss had offered me a job. He was quite keen to see me get ahead, and I joined the firm as a design and management apprentice. He had envisaged, there was no formal structure, it was just he invented this. He envisaged that I would be trained up in all the aspects of the woolen industry as it was that my father was working in, and be able to join the management of the organization. He retired a couple of years later and everything changed. A new management came in and it was rather forgotten what I was there to do. So that was fine. At the same time, round about the same time, I was beginning to think through my faith. My father was an elder in the church. He was a very committed church worker. And I had been taken along to church. I think it was more I was taken rather than that I ever wanted to go. In fact, in sort of early teenage years, I used to wait until I could hear the church bells, and then I would get up because I knew I wouldn't have time to get ready to go to church. So it wasn't something that was big on my agenda. But later teens, I started to think about faith. And I felt I started to understand it, at least in my head, and that I was prepared to at least say I was churchy. I was very much involved in a youth organisation called Boys Brigade, and I also became involved in a youth club in the neighbouring church. I got really involved there and eventually was on the committee of the church, of the youth club. And during the time I was on the committee, the church said they were going to hold an evangelistic mission. These things don't happen so much now, but it was more the flavour of the day then. Yeah, and they were going to be very progressive because they were going to have a coffee bar.
Oh, really?
For the young people at night.
Okay.
And the youth club was asked to get the things ready to make
this was Northern Ireland at that time, Graham.
Northern Ireland, yes. Yeah. A dismal-looking church hall to be an attractive venue for young people for 2 weeks. Yeah. And we managed to do that. Yeah. Being a person that had some sense of responsibility, I thought I'd better go to these meetings, and that I'm part of the committee that's supposed to be helping with it. Hmm. So I went along each evening to the church service and then to the coffee bar meeting. The guy who was the evangelist, a lovely, cultured gentleman, who spoke out the gospel in a really relevant way for young people. And towards the end of that fortnight, I thought, yes, it's all in my head, but nothing's happened anywhere else. I need to understand this more. On the last night, well, the night before the last night, actually, I was sitting in a group of young people and we were talking about Christian things, and this young lady was sitting beside me. Her name was Liz. Yeah. I knew her well.
Anyone we know?
You couldn't know this young lady. And our families were friends and we were talking. She was a committed Christian. And I was, usual me, well, you know, you can take it or leave it. You don't have to be too particular about it. Don't let it impact your life too much. I believe, but I don't want to let it make a difference. And she started to argue with me. You'd say we've been arguing ever since, but not really. She contradicted me strongly and said, you know, in the book of Romans, there's a verse, and I've got it written down here in front of me. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. She said, you've got to show that you belong to Jesus. You have no option. Well, I waffled on and got myself out of the coffee bar that night, went back to the final meeting on the Saturday night, and they announced there that if you wanted to show that you were committed to Jesus, come along to the church hall the following afternoon. I spent a pretty sleepless night, and the next day I thought I will, and then I thought I won't, and then I thought I will. So at 10 minutes to 3, I walked out of the house. Liz's church was quite close by, and I could walk there in a couple of minutes. And I remember walking down the road, and I came to the church gate, and I thought I turned left here, and I went straight on. And I kept walking. And I walked for about 300 yards, and I turned around, and I thought, I'll go home. And I walked up the road, and I came to the church gate again. And I saw it, and I thought, I've got to turn in. I've got to say to myself and to other people that I belong to Jesus. And I turned in there and went into the church hall. And there were 44 people in that church hall that afternoon who were doing exactly the same thing and were just as apprehensive as I was. But Michael Perrott, the evangelist, was able to talk through what the Christian life ahead was and how we could start to live for Jesus. So that's how I came to faith. I discovered that the work in the woolen trade was not going to be terribly well paid. And around that time, we were starting to get quite serious, Liz and me. She had gone to Canada for a year, taught in Canada for a year, and then come back for a family wedding. She wasn't sure whether she was going to emigrate, but she stayed on, and we became more and more friendly. And as I was thinking about the future, I thought, I can't think about marriage staying in the situation I'm in. And at that time, the Michelin Tire Company was opening a plant in a town 5 miles away from us. And I went and applied for a job there, was interviewed and was successful. It was a job on the shop floor in the inspection department. And that was great. I enjoyed it. It's a company I thoroughly respect. Still say that the Michelin tires are the best tires on the road. There are other types you can have.
Yeah.
There's only the one for me.
Fair enough.
And it was a good company to work for, a French company. I was with them for about 18 months, and I was asked to go for management selection at their company headquarters in Stoke-on-Trent. I passed the 3-week test there, and then went on for 6 months commuting back and forward from Northern Ireland to Stoke-on-Trent on a weekly basis for the management training. I stayed with the company for 9 years. But in the first year that I was in Michelin, I was listening to a sermon one Sunday evening, and God called me into Christian service. It didn't seem real. How could I go into Christian service? How could I become a minister? Because that seemed to be what God was calling me to be. There was a strong emphasis within what was said that I should be thinking about ministry. But the Presbyterian Church, of which I was a member at that stage, for anybody entering ministry, they had to have a degree. Now, from no qualifications to a degree, it's a long haul. So for the 9 years in Michelin, I wanted to do something, but there was nothing there, nothing I could do. Did some night school, got GCSEs, a couple, and then I began to feel maybe that call was just the thoughts of a young Christian rather than a real call. But in 1973, Liz and I, a year after we were married, had led a group of our young people from the church. We were both involved in Bible class leadership by that time. We took a group to a festival in London, at Earl's Court, called Spree 73. And there were about 10,000 young people from all over the UK and Ireland meeting there. Billy Graham was the evening speaker each evening, but he wasn't doing evangelistic meetings. He was speaking about Christian service. We had seminars each day and free time, and then they sent us off to Wimbledon to do door-to-door witnessing, which was quite an experience. And
could have been worse than Wimbledon, perhaps.
Oh, could have been worse.
There are other areas it may not have been too easy.
Always get a classy area for me. And at the end of that week, Liz and I were feeling even more convinced that we were called. But nothing happened from that. But one thing that did happen while we were there was that I came across a new organization called Tearfund, just in its infancy. And I thought, this is the one for me. I'd been involved and interested in poverty alleviation for quite some time. But this one held the gospel and poverty alleviation together in a unique way. A couple of weeks after we returned with our young people, we brought them all back as well as taking them all away. Liz and I went to hear a church service where the deputy director of Tearfund was speaking in our own hometown. And Bill Latham, we met there, and we also met some people who were setting up a new prayer group in the town. They said they knew Liz, I didn't know them, but they said, come along. If you'd like, we're going to pray for this organization, Tearfund, once a month on the teen Thursday night of the month. So we went along, not knowing what it would be like, and we became more and more involved in that group. Interestingly, that's 47 years ago, and that group has met every month praying for Tearfund, really? And it's still in existence.
Isn't that wonderful?
So, I mean, it just we were conscious of groups like that in Tearfund all across the country praying for us.
Right.
But that was where it started for me. A couple of years later, I was asked to become a volunteer for Tearfund. That meant going out speaking for Tearfund, running fundraising events, doing all sorts of things. And I regularly spoke for Tearfund. During that 9-year period, I suppose somewhere towards the end of it, where I was in Michelin but undecided, we had all this, but didn't know what the call meant. We went to a convention, which is similar to the Keswick convention. Liz and I were within travelling distance. We could pop down for the evening. And there we met somebody that she knew well, who was the superintendent of the Belfast City Mission. And I'd never met David Hamilton before. He was a lovely gentleman. And I remember stopping, the two of us stopped to speak to him. I was introduced. And shortly after that, David just looked at me and he said, "You are going to have a remarkable ministry, brother, but not in my mission." And I thought, well, not on my patch. Yeah, what does this mean? And he just carried on then with the conversation. I thought, he doesn't know me. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. And again, it stirred that sense of God's call. Something else that happened around the same time was that I was out preaching for Tearfund a Sunday morning, and you'll know, Tim, I'm not the sort of person that sees pictures and that sort of, it's just not me.
No.
On that occasion, while I was preaching, I had the strangest spiritual experience. It was as if God took me back, and I was over there preaching, and somebody spoke to me, and all they said was, "Why are you withholding this gift from me?" And I didn't know my answer was, in whatever was happening to me. I said, "But I'm here preaching." And the voice just came back and said, "Why are you withholding this gift from me?"
Really?
Nothing more. I went home, shared this with Liz, and she said, "Well, you've got to go and find out about the ministry, if that's what God wants for us." I had a friend who was the leader of the Tearfund group, who was a very successful farmer who had given up farming to train for the Presbyterian ministry. So I thought, I'll go and talk to him. So I made an appointment to go and see him. I arrived and he said, "Oh, just before we talk about whatever you're wanting to talk about, I want you to have a look at this job description." Now, my friend Alec was on the Northern Ireland or the Irish Advisory Committee for Tearfund. And it was a job description for a new coordinator for Ireland. He had never had this post. It was a very small organisation at that stage, but they wanted to develop the work in Ireland. And with that job description, I read through it and I thought, I can do all of this. I'm doing it as a volunteer. And with my management experience from Michelin, I can do all this. So we talked about it a little. And then I said, "Well, that's fine. I'll go and have a look at this." And he said, "Do you want to talk about whatever you came to talk about?" And I said, "No, let's look at this first." And went home, showed it to Liz. Cut a long story short, I applied and I was selected for the job. And it started 2.5 years of the most wonderful experience and happiest time in our lives.
Wonderful.
We watched the Lord developing Tearfund in the whole of Ireland. I covered the whole of the country, north to south. And we had relationships with church leaders all across the country, and supported the support groups, the prayer groups, recruited more volunteers. And at the end of that 2.5 years, I was invited to go and join the Tearfund leadership team in Teddington. My boss was moving to Africa, and he said, would I come and take over that role? Not altogether easy, because I was then going to be managing the guys I had been colleague with. So Liz and I thought about this carefully. Her health wasn't good at the time, and it was quite a consideration. But as she's done with every step, every crazy step of this journey, she said, of course we'll go. And that was giving up the support she had from her mum and her other aunts, willing to go. So we moved to London, settled in New Malden, and I took on a role of being responsible for all the UK-facing activities of Tearfund within the leadership team. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting development, and quite a challenge to us. I was regularly speaking and preaching on behalf of Tearfund, and we found a wonderful church, Christchurch, New Malden, and a wonderful set of friends there. You know, in the Bible, Jesus says, when you move from your friends and your relations for me, I'll give you new friends, I'll give you new family. And he did exactly that.
Right.
And these are friends that we're still in touch with and very close to.
Mm-hmm.
So my work went on in Tearfund, and I did a variety of jobs. When I had been there 19 years, I was asked by the director at that time if I would become the deputy director for Tearfund. We hadn't had a deputy director up to then, but he felt that he needed somebody to understudy him in that way. And he said to me, will you become deputy director? And I said, what does the job involve? He said, I don't know. He said, but I just know that we need to work together as a team. And the chemistry was right between us. And we worked out what I was supposed to do. And it released him for the bigger international activities that the organization was getting involved in at that stage, with kindred organizations across Europe and in North America. So that takes us up to my last 10 years within Tearfund. And I had a total of 29 years in Tearfund, and it was a tremendous organization to work for. Not totally smooth the whole way through. I mean, none of the ministries that I've been involved in have been totally smooth.
I know what you mean.
I travelled to 30 different countries in my time in Tearfund. Had a
really
privilege. But the greatest privilege was meeting Christians who had nothing, but they had the joy of the Lord. Christians that you shared fellowship with. We used to cherish being with a group of Latin Americans who loved to pray in Spanish. So they prayed in Spanish, I prayed in English. And it didn't matter that we didn't understand each other's language. We were one in Christ. So Tearfund was a great experience. Had to face many of the traumas that the organization had to face. And I suppose the biggest of these was the tsunami, the Indian Ocean tsunami. And I was actually responsible for the organization at that stage. It was between directors, and the board had asked me to be acting general director at that stage. It was Christmas Eve, Boxing Day, and the whole organization was closed down for a week, and we had nobody in the office. So we had to open up the office. Senior management don't know things about how to open an office, you know. So we had to find somebody who could let us into the building, and then switching on the computers and things, that was quite another thing.
Not setting off the alarms as well.
Indeed, yeah. So there was all that. On that first day, I think there were 8 of us at the beginning. Our international director was off making contacts all over the world, and we started to hear the phones ringing, and we started on the phones and we took calls all that day. They just never stopped. And a few other people turned up that had heard that we might be in, and I remember receiving one call that just said, I have a donation here, I want to give you £10,000.
Oh,
and
goodness.
On that first day, we had, I think it was about £250,000.
Wow.
The whole sum of support for our tsunami work was 25 million. But that first day, we were working with pens and pencils and bits of paper and taking down addresses and passing them on. Liz arrived at lunchtime with lunch for all of us, and we put her on the phone then after she had cleared up after lunch. So it was a big time, and a real test for the organisation, a period where we grew as an international organisation. And I had the privilege of visiting some of the sites in South India and Indonesia in the following year to see the impact of the tsunami and the impact of our work.
Yeah. I mean, that is such, I know I've heard you speak about that before, and it is so, it does really resonate so much, because I mean, most of us of a certain age will remember that ghastly time with the tsunami. We've never seen anything like it. Maybe it's modern technology, that sort of global news that could bring it to us, and all the videos, and then you bring it alive by talking about that, and just how much. But the response was really quite phenomenal, Graham, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. It was not just Tearfund, but to every organisation.
To every organisation. Yeah. That's just wonderful. Yeah. Graham, can I just take you back, just brief? I don't want to dwell on it too long, but I know there are people who face all sorts of challenges in their life, and having got to know you and knowing your story, I never cease to marvel about how you've managed to overcome what, you know, is a problem for someone taking on the sort of work that you've taken on, your dyslexia. You and I both were similar vintage. We know full well that at school must have been really tough for you, really tough. I can just imagine a little bit of what it was like. And yet you've overcome, with God's power and God's grace, you've overcome that to be a marvelous speaker. I mean, we love hearing you speak. And all these jobs that you've done, can you comment a little bit more about how you felt God's power and God's grace in those times?
Well, sometimes it's in very practical things. Like, I've been very fortunate to have very good PAs who helped me. I didn't need to spell. I just needed to dictate. And that helped. I always remember my first PA in Belfast. About 6 months after we'd been working together, she said to me, "Graham, you're a real problem, because your spelling is very convincing. I used to be able to spell and now I can't." So, you know, if you can laugh at it a bit, it helps.
Well, wonderful. You're wonderful. You can laugh about it. Yeah.
The introduction of computers that provide spell check is another super thing. And a lot of people who have understood and been patient with me. Not always. I remember one guy, when I was doing Michelin training, I had to write something, and I can still remember sitting in the office next to him as I knew he was reading it, and hearing him laughing. Oh dear. That moment does hurt. But I've just felt that through all my time, why should somebody with no education, no qualifications, no degree, end up in a role like I managed to end up?
It's a wonderful story.
It's not of me. It's not my talents. It's what God has been doing, working in me, and saying, "I take the weak things of the world to confound the strong." That verse has always stuck with me. It's not me, it's God. And I have no other explanation for it, Tim. Why did they select me in that interview in Tearfund? Why did the management team invite me to be a part of that team in Tearfund? Why did the board ever let me loose as even deputising director? I don't understand it, but I can say that God's been in every step of the way.
It really is the most wonderful testimony, Graham, to God's power in life. And we were speaking just now, weren't we, about the way we really need to, and we're trying to encourage everyone, all of us, to reach out to God, to lean on God at these times. And this is a theme. We've had these 5 chats now through January from a whole range of people, as you will know, coming to faith in different ways. And the one thing, as I sit and I listen to each person speaking, last week with Sandra and Chris Tebbett talking about coming to faith through the severe traumas of the birth of their second child, and all different ways they've come. And of course, Paul Cowley, etc., and Liz Wyatt early on, I think, and probably what I would say a lot of us would resonate to, a relatively straightforward, and yet drawing into such a life of faith. It's wonderful. And it's God just choosing his soldiers in this unique way, and somehow or other that tap on the shoulder. It's I nearly say it's remarkable. It's God's world. But Graham, can I take you to the point where you said that you walked past the group that yeah, that's right, the group. But then you were drawn back, and I'd like to just come back to that, if I may, because it's a theme that has come with a number of speakers during this month, and I've been looking to try to bring people to share their testimony, that even though we might walk past, even though we might try and walk away, God draws us back. Can you bring us any more insight into that experience of God drawing you back at times?
Yeah, it happens so often. We all need to come back. On that day, I thought my heart was going to bounce out through my chest. Fear. I didn't know what was ahead. Now, if I had known what was ahead, I would have thought, oh yeah, let's skip in here. But it's not like that, because we can only see what's there in front of us. Mm. We can only cope within our own understanding at that point. And hindsight is a great teacher. And if I had known how good God is when I walked through that gate, it would have made it an awful lot easier.
Yes. It's a stepping out of the boat and letting go.
Yes, yeah. And there's no, you can't say what's the recipe to make it possible. Yeah. You just have to do it. When you step out of that boat, walk on whatever water's there.
Yes, yeah. Well, Graham, that's just great. I really do thank you for being prepared to come and share so much of your sort of personal thought. And it's a wonderful story how God could take someone, as you say, with no education. And a lot of us will understand, have some idea, because we were of a generation, we came through the education system. It's a very different world today, and we can't judge anything by it. But you obviously have had a really hard time to get to where you are. Some wonderful people in your life to get, but God's hand on your shoulder all the way through, and your witness, your testimony is so inspiring. Thank you very much indeed. I love to you. I love to Liz as well.
Could I just finish it?
Yeah, sure.
Because when I was 58, God tapped me on the shoulder.
Which was only quite recently.
That's just around the corner.
I know.
And he talked to me about ordained ministry, which had been the original call.
Right.
And I inquired about this and was very quickly sent off to the DDO, the diocesan director of ordinance, the person that does the first stage of selection. I then was sent for formal selection in the Church of England, and was selected for ordination training.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
The new DDO phoned me up to tell me that I had been selected, and you actually know him, Robert Titley, who you interviewed a few weeks ago. He was the DDO.
Oh, right, really?
It was great for me to see that on there and be reminded of Robert.
All right, yes, yeah.
But did the training, did a curacy, and then during that time decided that it was time to take early retirement from Tearfund. God made that very clear. I was struggling with the end of the ordination training, and I need to have at least 3 days a week to work on it.
Right, yes.
So I thought I'll get a part-time job, and cut a long story short, God provided an organization that needed a director for 2 days a week to actually help them through a difficult period. And I took on that role, said I could only come for 4.5 years as I was going on to help in a church. They accepted that, and then finished my curacy. At the end of that, because I had been also doing further training, I was awarded a BA in Ministerial Studies from Christchurch Canterbury University, which you can imagine what that meant.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
We went to Essex for 5 years for ministry there. It had been our sense of call to give the last 5 years from 65 through to 70 before retirement to work in a church where a minister was struggling. So we did that. And then we ended up coming to Hordle in retirement. So the Lord has been with Liz and me through it all. And he has led both of us. Liz has been remarkable because every crazy idea that I came up with, she would say yes. So
that's wonderful.
It's great to have the two of us working together in that. So
it's great.
Thank you for the opportunity just to share what God has been doing in our lives.
Well, Graham, it's a privilege. I'm just simply the guy who sits here and turns the computer on and records it. I mean, it's the guests that make it. It is lovely. It's such a privilege to sit here and meet so many different people. And just recently, hearing these various stories to faith has been really, really inspiring. And thank you very much indeed. As I say, love to both of you. Thanks for giving us your time. You said retirement at Hordle. Just at the moment, I think I'd say perhaps maybe semi-retirement, Graham, but I know you're working very, very hard for us, doing so much for in the parish and so much on the online work. Thank you very much. We really, really do appreciate it. So I look forward to when we can worship together in church and we can go and have the four of us have coffee together with all the rest of our friends. And God bless. Thank you.
Thanks again.